Hey everyone, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host JR. We've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten as the season is approaching. We are getting more and more excited for what's going on. Got a lot of good camp intel from different sources and people out there who are covering teams. So it's a lot of fun to read about every single team, hear what's going on. Today we're going to focus in on one team in their camp a little bit with some interesting stuff that's happening there. We're also going to talk about the new conference realignment teams and who the most likely team that is going to be the most successful in their new conference is going to be. And then we're also going to talk about NFL draft prospects and which teams in the Big Ten have the most NFL draft prospects here right before the season starts. I think it's going to be really interesting to compare later after the season is over and say, oh, they had this many, or these were the names that were the top prospects. Did somebody else enter into that? How did things shake up? It's going to be really, really interesting. Do remember that we do have episodes for you every Monday morning at 6 a.m., Friday and Saturday morning at 6 a.m. We also have a live for you on Tuesday nights at 9 p.m. and Wednesday nights again at 9 p.m. Please come check out the lives. That's the one that normally has Zach and Kent and all the other fun people hanging out over there with us. I think this Tuesday we're going to have the Nebraska guys on, so it's going to be a good time having them come on over and check us out. But first, let's get this episode started, right? The top 6 Big Ten football teams with the most 2025 NFL draft prospects. All right, so before we get to this list, what I did just to make sure what I was coming up with was accurate is I went through the past 3 drafts just because I didn't want to go past the COVID times, and I felt like it was a good sample size to look at. So the 2024, 2023, and the 2022 draft and see how many players were drafted with the 14 Big Ten teams and then how many would have been drafted with the 18 Big Ten teams. And then after we look at these 6 teams, we'll go back and we'll see, okay, or we'll go forward and see 2025, how many players with the 14 teams and how many players with the 18 teams. What does that look like? Is it comparable? Is it something that makes sense? We'll see from there. So 2020, let's start most recent one, 2024. The Big Ten, the 14 team Big Ten had 42 players drafted. That's really low. Really low for the 14 team Big Ten. It's the lowest of the 3 that we looked at. But with the addition of the 4 teams from out west, the Big Ten would have actually had the most of any conference at 69, which is crazy that the Big Ten would end up with the most players. Now, that also contributes to the Big Ten having more teams than the SEC, but still, that would be something that would be pretty incredible for the Big Ten to accomplish. In 2023, 14 teams in the Big Ten had 55 players drafted. If you would have added in the Pac-12 teams, again, it would have been 69 for the 18 Big Ten teams. So not as much of a boost from Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC there. And then 2022, 48 players with the 14 original Big Ten teams, and then 62 with the 18 Big Ten teams. So it's pretty reliable. There's for 2 years that you got 14 teams from the 18 team, or 14 players from the 18 team Big Ten added onto it. But the very most recent year, like I said, 14 team Big Ten had 42 players. You add in the Pac-12 teams, an 18 team Big Ten, 69 players. That is a huge, huge jump to get from 14 to 18 teams. All right, let's look at the teams with the most draft prospects. And we'll just start at number 1. Number 1, Ohio State. Ohio State returned a lot of their players from last year that could have gone to the draft, and they're actually coming back this year to stay and play another year, try to win a national championship, try to beat Michigan. And so their predicted first rounders, they have 3 of them. 3 predicted first rounders. Now, these guys are not like top 20, so they're all kind of on the edge a little bit. We'll see if they really stick with it, or maybe they jump up, get in the top 20, or maybe even get in the top 10. I don't think any of these guys are going to be a top 5 pick. I think you normally have to have a little bit more buzz for yourself if you're going to jump up to there. But who knows? Anything could happen. Emeka Buka might go off this year or something like that. So their top projected prospects, the first rounders, are Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver, Denzel Burke, the cornerback, and Tyleik Williams, the interior defensive lineman. Those are their three that are all in top 30, but not necessarily top 20. They're kind of in that 20 to 30 pick range. And honestly, some of them could scoot out of the first round. Some of them could get even higher. And then the next guy that is outside of the first round, but he could actually find himself scooting into the first round because I believe he was 42nd in the consensus NFL draft big board, Jack Sawyer. Jack Sawyer, defensive end, really came on strong at the end of the year last year with his sack total. Played a really good game against Missouri. He could have gone to the NFL. Probably wouldn't have been a first round draft pick. I don't think he would have gotten that, but he definitely would have been a day 2 pick at the very least. But he opts to come back instead. And then the next guy after that is Quinshon Judkins, the running back. You could say JT Tuimoloau, but those guys are really, really close. And so with that, I just went with personal opinion. And I think right now, with hype and who the player is, you're probably going to get Quinshon Judkins drafted higher than JT Tuimoloau. Things could change. JT could have a great season this year. I just don't think he has sack numbers. I don't think that he has the crazy, parts of his game that people really look for in those defensive ends. All right, next one, Michigan with 4 predicted first round draft picks and 8 total predicted draft picks. 8 seems low. I could see them getting a little bit higher than that, but we'll see. Their top prospects, the first round draft picks. I mean, everybody's gonna know these guys: Will Johnson, cornerback; Mason Graham, interior defensive tackle; Colston Loveland, tight end; and then Kenneth Grant, the interior defensive tackle. He's a freak, absolute crazy athleticism. The 5th guy, you probably are looking at either Donovan Edwards, the running back, or Rod Moore, the safety. Rod Moore obviously going to have a little bit of a harder time, increasing his draft stock. But if Donovan Edwards has a really good year, he could really increase his draft stock and do a really good job this year. So we'll see if he can do that. Next, number 3, Penn State. Penn State with 2 predicted first round draft picks and 8 total draft picks. So Michigan gets ahead of them, even though they're tied at 8. Michigan does get ahead of them with half of their players being projected to go in the first round. Penn State, their first round projected draft picks are Abdul Carter, the edge, and Dennis Sutton, the defensive lineman, who is more of a defensive end. I don't know why they didn't list him as an edge, but defensive lineman. So that's what they listed him as. The next guys after that are Kevin Winston Jr. These guys are not first rounders. Kevin Winston Jr., the safety; Drew Aller, the quarterback; and Nick Singleton, the running back. So very strong prospects for running backs here, and what we're seeing. Oregon also with 8 predicted total draft picks, however, only with 1 first rounder. That 1 first rounder is Evan Stewart, the wide receiver coming over from Texas A&M. We're going to talk a little bit more about him later on in the episode, but it's interesting how much buzz he continues to have off his recruiting rankings. He's had good seasons. He had nearly 700 yards in only 10 games his freshman year. He was all SEC, and he had 600 some yards in only 8 games last year, but he's just not put up the crazy numbers that you would see from a wide receiver that is being projected first round. I mean, Evan Stewart right now is being projected over Emeka Egbuka, and Emeka Egbuka could get the record for the most receiving yards at Ohio State before his career is over. Evan Stewart has barely cracked 1,000 in his career. Again, he's missed games, and Texas A&M has kind of been a dumpster fire with Jimbo Fisher there and the way he runs his offense. But still, he's riding off that recruiting ranking still quite a bit, and we'll see what his future looks like. I do think he'll probably end up being a first rounder, so I'm not knocking him, but that's my thought. The next guy, not a first rounder, Jabbar Muhammad, the cornerback. Josh Connerly, I always want to say Conley. Josh Connerly Jr., the offensive tackle. Tez Johnson, the wide receiver, and Johnny Cornelius, the inside offensive lineman. Johnny Cornelius. So Oregon, I mean, on top of having excellent wide receivers and an excellent secondary, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the guys they have there. They also have the line of scrimmage settled on. So you're going to feel good about this Oregon team this year at the line of scrimmage on both the offensive and the defensive side of the ball. You're going to feel good about the secondary. You got a lot of things to feel really good about this year if you're Oregon. It's kind of crazy. They only have 8 projected draft picks. I would think they're much higher than that. But at least where we sit right now, that's where we're at. Do I think they're going to end with 8? No. I think they're probably going to be more around 10 draft picks. I think that some more guys will kind of sneak in before the year's up, but we'll see. That's the thought for now. Number 5, Iowa. Iowa has been more of an NFL factory than I think people realize. Now, no predicted first round draft picks, but 7 predicted draft picks. Pretty cool. Xavier Nwapaka, the safety, is their highest one. Luke Lachey, the tight end, is next. Jay Higgins is third. Sebastian Castro, the DB, he might be drafted as safety, might be drafted as a corner. We'll see what the thought process there is, but he has some versatility. And then Yaha Black, however you pronounce it, Black, the edge rusher. He also seems to have some pretty good draft consideration from around the league. So Iowa doing what Iowa does. They are going to put guys in the league, and they're going to do it at a pretty cool rate. So like I said, safety, tight end, linebacker, DB, edge, still focusing primarily on that defense. We'll see if Tim Lester can, get some offensive talent in the NFL. And then last, but certainly not least, I guess not even last, 6, USC. USC has 4 predicted total draft picks. That's Bear Alexander, the defensive tackle, Jonah Monheim, however you pronounce his name. He's a center. He's played offensive tackle in the past, so he has that versatility, which is nice. Joquavius Marks, Woody Marks, the running back, and Kamari Ramsey, the safety. Those look to be the guys who are currently to be drafted from USC this year. I tend to believe USC is probably going to get some more guys. They have 2 defensive guys there, 2 offensive guys there. I think Miller Moss can play his way into the NFL draft this year. I think that you have some playmakers on defense who can find their way into the draft this year, and it'll be really interesting to see. Maryland, Minnesota, and Wisconsin all have 2 predicted draft picks. Michigan State, Purdue, UCLA, and Washington all have 1. And then Illinois, Indiana, Nebraska, Northwestern, Rutgers have no predicted draft picks. Nebraska surprised me. I would have thought somebody on that defensive line. If nobody else, Nash Hutmacher, he would have been at least a day 3 pick, but I don't know. That's what the numbers came out as. So, all in all together, the 2025 estimated draft numbers for the 14-team Big Ten, 45 players, which that looks right. We've had 42, 55, 48 the last few years, so that fits right in there. And then the 18-team Big Ten, 59 players, which is rather low, but as I said before, I do think there's going to be some more players that emerge from USC, Nebraska. I don't think they're going to get 0, and I could see more players emerging from Oregon as well. I don't think you're going to see 14 players combined drafted from the schools from the Pac-12. Just seems too low for me personally. All right, let's take a break really fast, then we'll come back and we will get into some training camp stuff for Ohio State. All right, got some really good info today from Ohio State. They had interviews with their cornerbacks and their wide receivers, 2 of arguably the best position groups on this team. Overall, the entire room, I'm not just talking about the starters, I'm talking about the entire room, the way they've recruited in the past, the way they've been able to get talent out of the transfer portal, all of that together. These are arguably the 2 best rooms on the entire team. So, one thing that's been happening this year in training camp for Ohio State that some people haven't realized, or maybe that's not been talked about as much, but is getting talked about now more because of these interviews, is how much trash talking is happening on the field for Ohio State, especially between the cornerbacks and the wide receivers. There's been some offensive linemen and defensive linemen jawing back and forth, trash talking with each other as well. Ohio State has a pair of twins on their team, and one of the defensive linemen got into it with one of the twins of the offensive lineman, and he quickly found out you don't get into a fight with a twin, right? Because his twin came over and started battling with him and jawing at him. So that story's kind of funny. But the trash talking and the kind of chippiness of the team, and it's not bad from what we've heard. I watched Ryan Day's press conference when he talked about it, and it felt like he was encouraging it, trying to encourage the chippiness and the kind of competitiveness, but also he didn't want it to escalate. And his thought seemed to be, he didn't say this directly, but seemed to be that there was a possibility that it might escalate, which is really interesting to me. I think at the end of the day, like you are practicing with these guys for day after day after day. You're constantly hitting each other. You're constantly going after each other. I mean, you start getting chippy and trash talk with another team, you're done playing that team that week. Like, right? Like, not very often do you play another team the back-to-back weeks, and even if that happens, you have a week in between. These guys, they're seeing each other every single day, and a lot of these guys are matching up with each other every single day. And so the chippiness, the trash talk, it all goes out there. One of the very first people that gave an interview was Denzel Burke, and Denzel Burke is kind of known as like the truth teller on this team. He's the one that if you can get him for an interview, he's going to say some pretty interesting things. So Denzel Burke was asked the top 2 wide receiver trash talkers, and he said Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis. The 2 young guys that are trying to make a name for themselves, they are the 2 biggest trash talkers in the wide receiver room. I was wondering, J.J. Smith, Jeremiah Smith, and what about him? There was another player who talked about him later on. I forget who it was. I think it was Davison Igbinosun. We'll talk about him here in a minute. But Jeremiah Smith, he will not say hardly anything at all. He'll kind of let you do the jab and let you do the talking. And they talked about there was this one play where Jeremiah Smith went up against Davison Igbinosun. And Davison Igbinosun, it was a 50-50 ball. He broke it up, and he got in Jeremiah Smith's face afterwards, something along the lines of like, yeah, that's what you get, or something, whatever they're saying out there. And so Jeremiah Smith just kept his mouth shut, walked away, walked back to the line, got ready to get another rep. Well, next time these 2 go together, the quarterback, there was another 50-50 ball in the end zone. This time, Jeremiah Smith comes down with it. Davison Igbinosun falls on the ground, and Jeremiah Smith looks down and says, "That's what you get." And so Jeremiah Smith is not, from what we're gathering, he's not the biggest trash talker in the sense of I'm going to come after you and chip at you the entire time. But you say something, I'm going to remember it, and I'm going to say it back to you when I get back at you. So that's pretty funny. But it sounds like Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis, these are the 2 guys that are just the chippiest, or the most chippy, whatever. Burke was asked why it's important to him and the other guys that they talk trash and kind of go after each other. He says it tells them they can't mess with us. And he said he wants to bring that same attitude to the field and making sure that they know that the opponent, anybody they face, knows you can't mess with us. You can't beat us, and to ruin their spirit, basically is what he was saying, which is interesting. That's not something we've heard out of Ryan Day players before. Ryan Day players have been rather reserved. There's been thoughts that maybe they could have been chippier. G. Scott a couple years ago did headbutt a Michigan player, but that's resorting to a level of physical altercation that's going to get a flag, so you obviously don't want that to happen. But for the most part, Ryan Day players have been known as not super chippy and trash talky with one another. Carnell Tate gave a fantastic interview. We're going to talk about what he said more a little bit later on. But when he was giving his interview, he was asked, who talks trash more, Denzel or... I couldn't even finish his question. Kind of felt bad for him. Denzel or, and then right away Carnell Tate cuts him off and says, no, one. Which, if you don't know, the players, one is what they call Davison Igbinosun. So that's like his nickname. He says, one. You're going to feel one out there. You're going to hear him and you're going to feel him. And so that's been the sentiment this entire time, that this Davison Igbinosun cornerback is the one who has the one. He's the one that has really been instigating a lot of this trash talking that's been going on in the Ohio State practice. But it's not just the cornerbacks and the wide receivers. Jeremiah Smith was interviewed, and he was asked about the trash talk. And, he said his thing, I don't really get into it. I don't talk all that much. Try to stay humble. Go in, get my work done. Might say something here and there, but at the end of the day, it's not something he goes after him a whole lot. Well, he did bring up and noted that trash talking is also coming from Will Howard, the new Kansas State quarterback, which, if you know anything about his transition to Columbus, it was a little rocky at first. He didn't display maybe as much confidence as you would think he would have, and he was a little reserved. But this practice here in the fall, summertime, whatever you want to call it, right before games start, he's been very confident. Here's what he said. Here's what Jeremiah Smith said. He definitely made a big jump from the spring. I like his confidence. He's starting to talk a lot of mess on the field. I love quarterbacks who love to talk, just get around these players and make them feel good about themselves. He talks a lot on the field. He says a lot of stuff that I can't say, and he kind of smiled, but he is going to talk for sure. Which I think this is refreshing for Ohio State fans after last year, right? Last year you had Kyle McCord, who was very reserved. I mean, one of the most reserved quarterbacks we've seen. He had kind of his moment after the Notre Dame game where you saw all that emotion, but you really didn't see that again after that game. You saw Kyle McCord get very reserved, maybe not have so much of a leadership role that some fans would have liked. But this is turning out to be one of the bigger differences with Will Howard, is the confidence, his willingness to open his mouth, say something, not just to the other team, but to his guys as well. Very, very interesting what's going on here. And finally, Carnell Tate, like I said, we're going to get back to him. Here he is. He expressed a lot of confidence in himself and Chip Kelly's offense, which, if you're going to be a good trash talker, you got to have that confidence. And so I felt like it was really, really interesting what he had to say. Carnell Tate said that his goal this year is 1,000 yards receiving. Who doesn't love that, right? Sure, that should be your goal, to have a great year, and 1,000 yards receiving is a great way to show that. When he was asked how many guys can have 1,000 receiving yards, right? Because he said, well, if that's your goal, it's probably somebody else's goal too. How many of you guys can do that? He said all three, implying Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, and Emeka Egbuka, of us, or four, he also included Brandon Innes there, can have 1,000 yards. So you tell me, all three of us or four of us can have 1,000 yards. Is he saying they can all have 1,000 yards together, or any one of those guys could break 1,000 yards? I read it the first time as he's saying all four of them together could have 1,000 yards. Will Howard would have to throw for over 4,500 yards for that to happen. I mean, you just take into account the balls that are going to go to the running back and the tight ends and all those other stuff as well. I mean, I don't think there's any way that you're going to be able to have four guys have 1,000 yards receiving with less than 4,500 yards. I don't see how it's supposed to happen. But he didn't stop there. He continued and said, we got two great running backs. They can have 1,000 rushing yards. So Carnell Tate, not only supremely confident in himself, and he went on the interview to talk more about Chip Kelly and his confidence with him, but he's confident this offense is going to rack up a whole bunch of yards, which, in fairness, they did rack up a whole bunch of yards last year. The offense for Ohio State, their problem was not moving the ball down the field. Their problem was when they were in the red zone, they couldn't run the ball. They couldn't figure out how to get the ball into the end zone. And it was when it was 3rd and 2 or 4th and 1, they couldn't figure out how to get that last little bit that they needed for a first down. Let's look at the Big Ten last year, okay? The Big Ten last year had 2 1,000 receiving yard receivers. Both of them are gone. All right. We had Marvin Harrison Jr. and Isaiah, it's either Williams or Walker from Illinois. I apologize. Should remember his name. And they had 2 1,000-yard rushers. One of them is back, Kyle Monangai. The other one, Blake Corum. Now, I think they brought a 1,000-yard rusher in. I forgot who that was. But for players that actually played in the Big Ten last year, Kyle Monangai, Blake Corum. If all 6 of these guys have 1,000 yards, that would triple. Sorry, not triple. That would nearly double. No, it wouldn't nearly double. It would be the same number of rushing yard of players. I don't know how I'm not saying this correctly. If 4 Ohio State players get 1,000 receiving yards, that would be double how many players had 1,000 receiving yards in the entire Big Ten last year. If 2 running backs at Ohio State get 1,000 rushing yards, that would be the same amount of players in the Big Ten overall last year that had 1,000 rushing yards. I'm an Ohio State fan. I would love that. Do I think it's going to happen? Heck no, I don't think it's possible. I love the enthusiasm and the goal setting by Carnell Tate. Do I think Carnell Tate can get 1,000 yards receiving? Of course. I think that can definitely happen. But we'll see what happens with Ohio State this year. Sounds like some things are different. Sounds like they have a lot of confidence in themselves. But the thing they need most of all, they don't need the toughness from their cornerbacks and their wide receivers quite nearly as much as they need it from their offensive line and their defensive line. I think their defensive line was tough last year. I think their defensive line hit guys, stopped the run, did a great job. I think the offensive line could improve in that area. Not going to say they were soft, could improve in that area. And so we'll see if Ohio State can do that this year. Love the fact that the wide receivers and the cornerbacks are trash talking, have a lot of confidence, and they're being tough with each other. Let's get the offensive line to do the same thing if Ohio State is going to achieve their goals this season. Take another break, and then we'll be right back to talk about the team that is projected to be the most successful team transitioning to a new conference. All right, let's talk about the team that is transitioning to a new conference that I think is going to have the most success in doing that in 2024. That team is the Oregon Ducks. Now, there are 13 teams transitioning to a Power 4 conference this season. Those teams are in the ACC, Cal, SMU, Stanford. None of those are going to do it, okay? They're just not going to do it. Get rid of the ACC in your mind. In the Big Ten, Oregon, UCLA, USC, Washington. The team that is most likely going to do that out of all of them is Oregon. They have the most hype. They have the best odds to win the Big Ten this season. And not only that, but they're a top 5 team in pretty much every poll out there I've seen. Heck, I've seen some people putting them over Ohio State in the polls. Sure. Big 12, Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. Now, Utah is not necessarily a national championship contender in my mind, but I do think they are the only team that enters into the conference and is the best team in that conference. Oregon has a argument for it over Ohio State. Texas has an argument for it over Georgia. But I think I can definitively say Kansas State is very close. I can definitively say Utah is the best team in the Big 12, and they are coming in. It is their first year in the Big 12. I don't mean that as a slight to Kansas State. I'm just being honest. And then finally, 2 new teams in the SEC, Oklahoma and Texas. Like I said with Texas, I think that they are the second best team in the conference. They could win the conference. We'll see. All right, these 3 teams that I highlighted, their odds to win their conference this year, Oregon sits at plus 200. That's second. Texas sits at plus 300. That is second in their conference. And Utah sits at plus 300. That is first in their conference. These are bet 365 numbers. These same teams odds to win the national championship this year. Oregon and Texas, both plus 800. Utah, plus 6,600. So, doesn't look good. They could win their conference, but if you're not going to compete nationally, can you really be the most successful team entering into a new conference? You could be the most successful team of a new team entering into a conference in that actual conference. Utah could be the only one of these three that wins their conference. But I would still say Oregon or Texas had a more successful year if they get to the college football playoffs and they win 2 or 3 games, even if they don't win their conference, like I think both of them very well could do. Essentially, the odds have Oregon saying they're going to be the most successful team. We'll see how that plays out, but that's the way it works. Their games this year that will define that for them are Ohio State on October 12th, at Michigan, November 2nd. I know some people are going to have a problem with me putting this game on the list, but at Wisconsin, November 16th. And I know what you're saying. Wisconsin's not going to be any good this year. And, they're not nearly on the level of Ohio State and Michigan. Well, okay, I hear you. But let's also look at the schedule. Oregon gets a bye right before they play at UCLA. And then they go through an 8-game stretch. At Wisconsin is the final game of that 8-game stretch. They get a bye week before Washington, and then their season's over. That's 8 games in a row. No bye week. It's going to be difficult. That is going to be difficult for Oregon to be able to accomplish, especially when you're going to Camp Randall and it's your 4th road game in that 8-game series. So, you play at UCLA, you play at Michigan, you play at Purdue on a Friday, and then you finish it all off, the entire thing, with at Wisconsin. If I was going to put a game on Oregon's schedule to say, game they shouldn't lose, but I wouldn't be surprised if they lose, at Washington, November 16th. If Oregon beats Ohio State and Oregon goes into Ann Arbor and beats Michigan, everything's looking great. Just watch out for the Badgers. That's all I'm going to say. Not so much because I believe the Badgers are a better team. Like I said, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you when you say, oh, JR, Wisconsin's not nearly as good of a team. But because of that schedule, all the travel, that is 3 non-Big Ten West teams. I hate that I just said Big Ten West. 3 non-teams that are out in the West of the Big Ten that you're traveling to. And your final one is arguably the hardest stadium of those 3. And it's the very last game of that stretch. And then Washington, November 30th. I don't think Washington will be nearly as good as Oregon this year. I think Oregon will take care of them pretty well. But it is a rivalry game, so you never know. Even if they only lose one game, they're going to be a 5th or 6th seed. And if they're a 5th seed, they're going to play Liberty, Boise State, yada, 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 group of 5 team. They're going to win that game. And then they're going to go and face either the Big 12 or the ACC champion, which we just looked at and said the Big 12 champion, or most likely Big 12 champion, at least by the odds, has a 6,600 plus 6,600 chance to win the national championship. Even if Oregon doesn't win the Big Ten this year, they could, but even if they don't, they're going to have a very successful season. They will be the team with the most successful season that is transitioning to a new conference. And a big reason because of that is because of 5 players I want to list you that are huge additions for this team. Obviously, Evan Stewart. Talked about him, the former 5-star. He was a 5-star transfer. He's got a ton of hype still. He was a 2022 SEC all-freshman team. He shines when he does get out on the field. Hopefully he can put together a full season this year. 10 games his freshman year, 8 games last year. We'll see. Jabbar Muhammad, the cornerback from Washington, going to be an NFL draft pick. Could play himself into the first round this year. I think that's unlikely, but he could very well do that. He was all Pac-12 second team last year and went to a national championship. Now, he didn't win, but he went, and he played okay. Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback from Oklahoma, consensus all Big 12 first team. This is a quarterback who got first team over Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, guys like that. He got first team consensus, coaches and media. He was first team. Pretty impressive. And I think that what he does fits very well with what Oregon is going to want to do. I do worry about the height a little bit. I think it's gotten him in trouble his career a couple times. But I think Oregon is smart enough to be able to work around that issue. Their fourth player, Jamari Caldwell, the interior defensive lineman from Houston, who was consensus all Big 12 last year, second team. But he's just a monster in the middle, guys. Oregon has done a fantastic job of recruiting the defensive line and also shoring up the defensive line. Because don't forget, they got Derek Harmon, too, from Michigan State. And they're not just relying on 2 defensive tackles to take all the snaps this year. That's actually one thing I'm concerned about with Ohio State. You hear some good stuff about some depth at the defensive tackle spot, but we've just not seen it yet. These guys we have seen Jamari Caldwell do a very good job. We have seen Derek Harmon do a very good job. So these are established players coming in to Oregon to shore up that defensive line. And it's going to be impressive, I think. And finally, Kobe Savage, safety, Kansas State, all Big 12, second team last year. And I like Kobe Savage a lot. I like his game. I think that he can be very effective for Oregon this year. And this Oregon secondary is going to be one of the best ones in the nation. And Kobe Savage, I believe, is going to be a big piece of that. So, like I said, the Oregon Ducks, watch out. They are going to have the most success of any team transitioning into a new conference this year. Going to take a break, and then we're going to look at some comments when we get back. All right, got 4 comments I want to take a look at and just respond to. So let's take a look. From Colin, the video we did about debating the best and worst Big Ten basketball coaches. What Brad did without a true point guard is truly amazing. Yes, but it's not like he had a point guard going into the season and then he got hurt. Brad did that to himself. I feel bad saying that because I really, really like Brad Underwood. I'm not trying to knock him. I just, can we give credit to a guy for doing a good job not having a point guard on his roster if he never put a point guard on his roster? I mean, I don't know. I think roster management is a part of it, and I think that Brad Underwood messed up the roster management there a little bit. So, again, yes, I do give him props that he did a good job adjusting and not having a point guard, but it's also not like he couldn't have added a point guard. So, yeah. Comment number 2. Painter lost catchings from Taterology. Good name there. Painter lost catchings because Painter wouldn't guarantee him playing time and likely wasn't going to play major minutes as a freshman, and he wanted to be a one and done, and because he had multiple upperclassmen ahead of him. The fact that Purdue is in a position that the loss of catchings will have a minimum effect on Purdue this season. Okay, Purdue fans, I like you. And this isn't necessarily to Purdue fans because every fan base does this. It just so happens this was a Purdue fan here. So I shouldn't have said Purdue fans like that. But Isn't it crazy how he is can talk about one recruit, how he's a freshman, he's coming in, he's going to do so well. I mean, I criticized Purdue for a while for bringing in so many freshmen. And all I heard back was, yeah, but wait till you see Catchings. He's going to play and he's going to be a fantastic piece for this team. Probably not going to start, but he's going to be a really good piece for this team and do really well. Okay. I questioned it because he's a freshman and because freshmen I don't think have as big of an impact as they used to in college basketball. But to then go from that to, well, we lost him. He wasn't going to play very much anyway. He wasn't going to make all that big of an impact. Like, come on, guys. Let's be honest here. And again, I'm not pointing out Purdue fans saying they're the only ones that do it. We all do it, right? Indiana fans were doing it last year with Xavier Johnson. Ohio State fans were doing it last year with Kyle McCord when they were gassing him up after the Notre Dame game. And then at the end of the year, they're like, this guy stinks. He was the reason we lost to Michigan, right? Every fan base does it. It's always comical to me whenever it happens. And like I said, it just so happens to be a Purdue fan here. I'm not saying it's all Purdue fans. It just is what it is. Number 3, the Big Ten mascots are better than everyone else video. He said, Creating with Code said, the fact that the Duck wasn't on this list and you guys still talked about him for over 2 minutes shows the brilliance of Oregon's marketing and the continued effort that they put into building their brand. It's genius. I'm here for it. Good show, guys. It's been fun getting to know the Big Ten. Go Ducks. So Creating with Code, yes, I agree with you. The Ducks should have been on that list. Whether it's basketball or football, he's one of the best in all of the sport. Any sport you do. In college athletics, he's one of the best. And it's not just because of the design. I mean, the design is great. But it's also because of the marketing, the branding, the things like that Oregon does with their duck. And it really is fantastic. I don't know if I would use the reason that we talked about for 2 minutes, over 2 minutes, as a reason he's really good, because me and Kent and Shabs can basically get up off or get on any subject. And case in point, when we talked about the Torvik predictions, I think we talked about Parker Fox for over 2 minutes as well. So it doesn't mean Parker Fox is some fantastic player, one of the best in the nation. It just so happens we talk about that stuff. Again, yes, the Duck is one of the best mascots in the nation. I just found it funny that in that same episode, we also went on a Parker Fox tangent as well. And some of you are listening to this, you're like, who the hell is Parker Fox? Well, Shab said the same thing. He had to Google him. We were doing that. All right, last comment. Debating the best and worst Big Ten basketball coaches, the who really cares comment about Pikel isn't going to age well this season. Neither will the misspelled pickle on the sidebar. Yes, I did misspell Pikel's name, and I did apologize for that. I do feel bad when I misspell names. I am not the best with pronouncing them, but I feel like I can always spell them correctly, so I do apologize for that. The other part of this comment, the who really cares comment, Steven, I get it. Like, nobody wants to hear that about their coach, but that was in regard to, like, is he 14th or 15th in the Big Ten as a coach, or 13th? At that point, nobody wanted to listen to us on the podcast talk about, who's the 14th best coach in the Big Ten? So that's what I meant by, I think it was me that said it. Who really cares? If not, it was not meant to be a dig at Steve Pikel. It was just me recognizing that probably nobody's going to listen to us debate who is the 14th and 15th and 16th and 17th best coach in the Big Ten. But that's just me. So thanks so much for watching this episode, everybody. Good 45 minutes for you here this morning. We'll come back with another one. I'll record Sunday night and then put it out Monday. I noticed you guys watch the lives a whole lot more than you do the recorded shows. So, just let me know what you guys want to do. Like, do you guys think the lives are more interesting because I can interact with you? What are your thoughts? If you guys have any, thoughts or help on how to grow the channel or anything like that, would love your recommendations there. So go follow the Big Ten Huddle on Twitter. We have a Twitter account now. I'm gonna be trying to tweet every single day with information about the show and things like that. So I appreciate everybody watching. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.